All right. Can people see this? I can no longer see you. Can you give me like a verbal?
Yes.
Yes.
Looks great.
Okay, awesome. All right, great. So we call this presentation Birddogging 101, but it's, really for all levels. So there'll be points I'm really excited to hear if you all have experienced birddogging. We can take some time and share some stories. So don't be thrown off by the 101 if you're not new to this, because it's great for people to share their skills too. If it's possible to unmute here, I would love to hear like people's ideas of what birddogging is. Birddogging can kind of take lots of different forms and look lots of different ways. So I always just like to take kind of a pulse check and see like what people's ideas of birddogging are.
So I'm going to unmute everybody right now and allow you to talk. So you can, oh, hopefully that's working. There we go. Okay, how about this? If you want to answer, go ahead and raise your hand on the little dashboard there, and we will try to get that to work for you. Or how about we type in the chat also? That's a good option too. There's a little chat icon down at the bottom and you can chat to everybody. Anybody?
Okay, I can also keep it rolling. Just like to kind of hear from what people's thoughts are. But like I said, birddogging can look like a lot of different things. Sometimes it can come across as something that people think of as being more antagonistic, maybe more often going after people we don't like, and sometimes it is, but more often than not, it's actually going after people that we kind of like, or at least think are okay, or perhaps the people that will say yes versus the people that we know will definitely say no. We kind of like to think of birddogging more as a campaign tool than a political tool. 90% of the time when we go to birddog, we're going in hoping and trying for a yes versus going in to try to expose someone. However, I will say sometimes it does become a political tool because sometimes the candidate or the elected will expose themselves under certain light by us going for our question, if that makes sense. This is kind of the textbook definition that we like to use in front of you. I'll just read it. Birddogging is the art and science of putting our elected officials or candidates on the spot, in person, in public, and on camera so they do the right thing. Birddoggers focus directly on the person with the power to give us what they want at a moment of easy access and when they're looking for our support, which is why, to the second point, right now is, sorry for the background noise, y'all. But that's why right now it's such a great time to be birddogging, because we have easy access to we're going to talk a lot about the Democratic candidates, but also all the congressional races in 2022. These are people that are sometimes hard to get to, but right now you can literally go to an early primary state and talk face-to-face with Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Tulsi, Bennett, all these folks who are currently in office, and just hit them all in one day. So it's like an extreme moment of easy access. And then the same is also true for all the 2020 congressional races. People that maybe don't often come in district, people that don't often maybe do town halls, perhaps are actually having to campaign this year for their seat, which is exciting because that means that we'll have access to them, which we don't ordinarily have. The goals of birddogging, we're trying to get the responses on record to the right questions, and we're going to talk a lot about questions later and how to craft the right question. And we're really trying to create movement within a legislation. It's not, an instant gratification thing. You can write an amazing question and show up at town hall, but it's unlikely that you're going to be successful necessarily in your first attempt. It's definitely something that you have to rinse and repeat really over and over and over again until you get to that yes. And part of what you're doing is really creating a movement. You all I know are focused very much at Move to the Amend on one campaign, which makes it even easier, but I'm sure more broadly, you're all concerned about lots of things going on. And it's okay to be working on many, many issues, but for birddogging, you at least need to have enough of a collective focused on that one campaign that you can have people back you up, because part of the magic of it really is that no matter where that candidate is going, someone's asking them a question about that issue, if that makes sense. I can just like give a quick example. So one issue that CPD works on is drug pricing. And there's a specific bill that we're supporting, and we'll look at a video in a minute here if it works, of someone asking Kamala Harris about the drug pricing bill. And it's a really well executed question. It was their first time doing it. It just kind of shows like how really easy it is to do and how we can all go bird dog. And you'll see Kamala Harris give this kind of an answer that politicians generally give the first time they ask a question when they still want to sound good, which is, oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I've heard of that. I might be on that. I like the sound of that. But the reality is she wasn't on the bill. She was able to look good in that moment and kind of save face, and everyone, you know, thought she answered it so well. But what she didn't know is we were going to have someone else ask her the next day in Iowa. This happened in New Hampshire, and then we followed up with her again in South Carolina. And we've had people all over the country following up over and over again on the same bill. So now we're in conversations with her about getting on that bill. So, you know, there's just like power in numbers, and just a reminder that bird dogging isn't like an instant gratification. And it often takes many, many interactions before you get to your yes. We can try to unmute again here if it's possible. We're going to talk today a lot about bird dogging the Democratic candidates. But like I said earlier, sometimes people think of bird dogging being more antagonistic and going after people who we think are going to say no versus yes to us, which might be some of the Democratic candidates, right? But at least some of them we hope we can get to yeses with. But sometimes people feel more uncomfortable about that versus bird dogging someone who they don't like. And I can speak for myself. Sometimes it's easier for me to like get the fire in my belly and like put me in a room with Mitch McConnell and I'd love to do this and that. And sometimes it can be harder to do the more restrained kind of bird dogging where you're really just coming off as like asking a polite question. So if anyone wants to share just something that you think about a candidate that you're kind of interested right now, one of the ones that might be in your top. If you were told that you had to go bird dog them, would there be anything that kind of would make you nervous or give you pause about bird dogging that, Alexis? Should we try to unmute and see?
Yeah, I don't know. The unmuting is weird. You all should be able to unmute yourselves. If you're having trouble with that, sorry. Maybe you could raise your hand in the icon or chat it in the chat bar.
And then if something's chatted, could you just read it? I don't know how to actually look at that from my page.
Yeah, totally.
Thanks.
While we're waiting for answers, maybe I could start. Would that be okay?
Great.
Yeah, so I tried to bird dog Bernie Sanders a couple weeks ago, and I was way more nervous than if I was bird dogging like a Republican, because I was like, oh, no, everything you're saying is great, and I don't want to like be adversarial or something. So that was different than I thought it was going to be.
Totally. That's happened to me a few times with Elizabeth Warren too. Like I get so nervous with her. I'm just like, you're so good on policy, and I'm about to talk to you about policy. Like you probably know more. You know, I get that feeling like you know more than me, which doesn't happen with many elected officials. Because I'm sure many of you know who have done lobbying visits and all these things is they actually don't typically know more than us, right? Like we're actually experts on a lot of these issues, and they look to their staff to help them. So it's just like a reminder that it doesn't seem like you can talk person to person with them, but you really can. Anyone have any thoughts?
So it looks like the options are to chat, to raise your hand, or use the Q&A function. So any of those will work. You can see all of those.
I'll go ahead too. If people have thoughts on the second question, it's is everyone given the same access to safety and opportunity at bird doggable events? And like the answer is no, so I'll save us that step. But if people have any comments on that, that's a question that we're going to keep in mind throughout the presentation and just keep coming back to. And we like to think about, I like to remind people it's who we are. I have a lot of privilege being a white woman in terms of getting called on, but it's not also just about me, it's also about who the candidate is. I like to bring up the example, I don't know if folks saw the white man who pulled a microphone out of Kamala Harris's hand at an event now maybe like a month ago. It looked really awful, right? For those of you that saw that clip that went viral, most people don't even know what his issue is. And his issue was animal rights, and it was like a worthy cause, but it got totally lost because what he did was just like so inappropriate given who he is in the world and who she is. So that's just like something we're going to think about throughout. If there are no comments, we'll just keep it moving. I can tell some stories, and I don't know, maybe Jessica, maybe you have some more stories. This is another chance, like if people want to share anything, I would love to hear. If it happened to you or just things that you maybe saw or, you know, friends or other people that you've done activism work with, I'd love to hear those stories. But I can give a few examples just quickly. Like most recently, we've had a lot of success actually with the Democratic candidates. We've been going to, you know, Nevada, South Carolina, New Hampshire, and Iowa on a very, very regular basis, hence like the rinse and repeat. And we're lucky enough to have folks in those different pockets of the country, not necessarily in those states, but at least in those regions. And we like rent minivans and like pack up together and drive around and follow the candidates around. All while trying to you know, stay somewhat anonymous. So we'll get into that more later. But when we pull our minivan up, we don't all get out together and sit together, right? Because we want the, you know, we really want to come off. And it is true that we're individuals also in this movement fighting for these different campaigns. So anyway, one campaign that we've been working on is called the CARE Act. It's around the opioid crisis and really actually just the overall overdose crisis in America. The price tag is really big. It's $100 billion over 10 years. It doesn't limit the access at all to opioids. So, you know, the pain community is with us on this. We're not trying to limit access. Same with the harm reduction community, right? People are able to get this medication still from their doctors into this legislation. It's modeled after the Ryan White CARE Act, which came about in the early 90s to address the AIDS epidemic, and it really looks at the opioid crisis in a similar way, which is it's a public health crisis, not a criminal justice crisis. So anyway, just some brief background on the bill. So we know with this big price tag, and even though it doesn't limit access, it still addresses this as a public health crisis. So obviously pharma is not a fan of this, right? So, and we know certain candidates have stronger relationships to pharmaceuticals and so on. So when the year started, the only currently elected candidates who were on the bill, Elizabeth Warren introduced it in the Senate, and then Bernie Sanders was also on it. And now I can say, after going to these events and hearing the same speech a million times, asking Cory Booker a million times, having Amy Klobuchar tell us tons and tons of times that that was Elizabeth Warren's bill and she wasn't going to get on it, we now have every single elected who's running for the candidacy on the bill. So, you know, it works. And it's one of those interesting things, too. We talked about a little bit in the beginning, recording it. And we'll talk about that more later. And sometimes bird dogging, I'm sure we've all seen great viral moments, but you don't necessarily have to get a viral moment. Like, no one knows why all these people got in the CARE Act. No one knows the story about it. But at the end of the day, all of these candidates, both senators and representatives, all running for office, are on the bill. So I can also talk about maybe like a more viral moment and also maybe a bit more antagonistic moment. One of my bosses, Ana Maria Archila, confronted Jeff Flake in an elevator during the Kavanaugh protest. I'm sure some of you have seen it. It got pretty, got picked pretty widespread. And I just like to bring up that moment because, sometimes we like to, people find power strangely and thinking things like that are like one-off, like just by chance things. And if they find out it was planned, somehow it's like paid protester, weird. I'm sure we've all seen this like Soros-funded woman in elevator. And really neither things are true, but the reality is we knew what we were doing. We were smart and we knew that there was one elevator that went to the hearing room. We had been going to that elevator and talking to senators all week long, and we knew they blocked off certain staircases and certain entrances, and we were tracking which senators had gotten in the elevator, so we knew which ones were coming. And I was with Anna, and we walked together to the elevator. What we didn't know is that CNN was going to be there, live streaming it, and it would explode in such a way. And then, of course, what was also, less rehearsed and from the heart is Anna and the other woman, Maria Gallagher, just met in the hallway. Maria had just been trained that morning on bird dogging. They just met. We heard that Blake was coming by. They like ran together to the elevator and made it happen that way. So I would just like to open it up again. If anyone wants to share any other stories, I'd love to hear them.
Okay, so a couple things in the chat. Keon, responding to your question about like being nervous about bird dogging, said asking the wrong questions or making an embarrassing move on live TV. Totally. And then Millie, who I know just bird dogged Elizabeth Warren like last week or two, said access, bring young and old. It got us in the door where otherwise we would not have gotten in. And I know she had her adorable baby with her, so that helps.
That's awesome. Yes, we love when babies come. Politicians love getting close to babies. It's our secret weapon. That's awesome. And totally yes to nervous and questions. So we're going to talk about that later in the presentation. I still get nervous sometimes with that, so totally.
Well,
does anyone have any? Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, yeah, feel free to share it in the chat. Anybody else? I can share what happened to me when I was trying to bird dog Bernie Sanders is that it was like a 2-second hesitation. There was a guy who I let cut in front of me when we were getting up to the mic, and it was just like this moment of me being polite, and then I instantly regretted it. And then I got cut off right before my question.
That's also happened to me a bunch. Like the in the moment thing is so hard too. I know even just like going, into the Senate offices or the House offices for meetings, and all of a sudden it's like I'm in the hallway and it's like there's Ted Cruz or something, and I just like blank, and I'm like, oh, I didn't. There's been so many times where someone's walked by me and I just like froze in the moment. So we'll talk about that a little too later on.
So really sorry,
cool.
This thing isn't working.
That's okay. I will keep it rolling. Okay, so let's see if this will work. If not, it's okay. This is what I was setting up earlier. So this woman is part of Bird Dog Nation. This was the first time she'd ever bird dog. She got trained like the week before. She did a really great job asking this question. And now she's like, this happened not really a week ago. I need to update the slide. This happened, I think, in early February or late January. But now her and her daughter have bird dogged so many times. I'm not sure if you all saw a lot of the candidates went to Homestead, one of the child prison camps that exist in this country. This one happens to be right outside Miami. So ahead of the debate in Miami, actually Allie and her daughter bird dogged the candidates for weeks, getting them to agree to come by the camp. Kamala Harris is one of them. Also Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren kind of released a video of her and a small girl going to the camp together. That was actually Allie's daughter. So you can go from 0 to 100 like Allie. But let me see if I can get this video to play. If not, I can send this around to you all later.
Talking about the truth, that's refreshing.
Can you?
Hi, thank you for taking my question, and thank you for talking about the truth. That's refreshing, and I was just for all. I want to tell you, I have a 14-year-old son who has a life-threatening disability, and he requires medication that he carries with him everywhere he goes all the time, and has since he was 2 and will for the rest of his life. And we've had the experience of drug companies raising the prices on that medication to the point where families who need it for their child's survival can't afford it. And so I'm wondering if you would consider co-sponsoring Senate Bill 102, the drug company pricing bill that will protect consumers from drug companies doing exactly this and abusing their monopolies by taking patents away from drug companies when they exploit their consumers in this way, and particularly when they charge Americans 10 times more than they're charging people in other countries for the exact same medication, because it would make me feel safer for my son in this country.
Thank you. I think I was on that legislation. I know I've been supportive of that effort in the past, so I can check specifically on that piece of legislation. But
okay, so I'll cut the senator off. But like I said, she was not on, and in that moment it's a common tactic of politicians, right? And part of that was not necessarily that she's against the legislation, and we are now in talks of getting on, although later she did kind of give more hard no's. But really a lot of about that, what it is, and I hope you could hear that okay, but we talk about winning the room, and Allie succeeded in winning the room. She told a really compelling personal story and asked a really strong question, and so everyone was waiting to hear if Kamala was going to say yes. So even though she couldn't fully say yes in that moment, she had to give like a half yes. Otherwise, she was going to lose the room. Like I like to talk about it as it's kind of you versus the politician on winning the room. And Allie really won it in that moment. And this is where the follow-up comes. Like, is it a win to get like a half yes to please the group? No, but is it a win to keep pushing them more and more every time when you go and you keep winning the crowd over and over, and then they get to yes, that's your win. So I kind of want to talk about too, Birddogging like doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Like it's one of our many, many tools. These are some other tools, certainly not all of our tools. They're all parts of a campaign, right? Like usually these are not standalone things. I'm sure many of you have done petitions, letters, and emails, gotten your friends to sign on. You're probably not going to win a campaign by just doing a petition, but there's power in that too, right? Like you're finding the people that are going to be part of your campaign. You're learning each other's stories. You're working together. And it's like a small list for people who are not generally used to any level of participation, right? Getting someone to maybe come over for brunch and do a postcard party is like a good initial, like dip your toes in. So there's still power in that, and it's still worthwhile, even if, you're not going to necessarily land the win after your postcard brunch. You're going to be gaining people into your campaign and help later on building the momentum. Kind of like a next step, and it doesn't always like go like a ladder like this, but sometimes it does. Phone calls, office visits, then we say birddogging. And you want to know, when you go to Birddog, it's helpful to know the history, and you can craft a better question. And if you know that you've already had conversations with the office, you just can craft a better question and know what angle to come at them with. And then, of course, there's protesting and then even civil disobedience. I like to bring up at this point, too, when we're talking about birddogging, people, when we're really going for the yes, and we really think there might be a yes, there's a level of, there's a certain way of doing it, and it's really just strategic. It's not that I don't believe in civility, I don't believe in respectability, I don't believe in any of that, but I do believe in winning. And so sometimes to win, you've got to play along with the strategy. And sometimes people get nervous to birddog because they think that people will say they're going after their candidate and stuff, but 9 times out of 10, birddogging comes off as someone who at least is interested in the candidate is just asking a good question. For example, Cory Booker is not, even in my top 5 of candidates. I've birddogged him a bunch of times. I think he thinks I'm like a super fan. He recognizes me. I think he gets a little nervous now when he sees me because he thinks I'm like so into him. I'm not into him, but I'm into him saying yes for my campaigns. And so far he said 3, we've gotten 3 co-sponsors from him out of this season. So just like to bring up that it's just a strategy. I don't think this is the only way to interact with politicians. I've been arrested, a dozen times for civil disobedience. I've helped hundreds of people get arrested doing civil disobedience. If people are interested in learning more about that, I'm sure some of you have done it as well. I'd love to hear those stories later too. We also do trainings in civil disobedience. I just like to point out that that's never something that people decide to do in the moment. It's very dangerous. Of course, not everyone can take an arrest for many, many reasons. And if you ever in the moment get angry and decide to get arrested, you really are putting everyone around you at risk. And every time we've done arrests in DC, even when it's 300 people, I have a sheet of paper from every single person that's getting arrested. I know all their information, all their contacts, emergency health stuff. Like there's a lot that goes into planning civil disobedience. We just recommend that it's nothing, that's ever done on the fly. Okay. And just let me know, again, I can't see the chat, so if people do have comments or questions, just type them in, and then if someone could Jessica, just let me know. I'm happy to pause at any point if people have thoughts or questions. But for now, we'll keep going into our to-do list. So the first thing is to find an event. I would love, I don't know if it's possible to get the information of everyone on this call. And if I could just get like email, cell phone, and zip, we can help push events out to you. We're going to be launching bird dogging campaigns, like I said, around the congressional races, which is a lot of tracking, right? These are a lot of people up for office. There's tons of events happening, and we kind of are assembling like an army of volunteers to help push out events to people so you know what's happening locally in your community. And then, of course, also, if anyone's interested in coming with us to one of the early primary states, we will continue to do that, at least for the next few months. In the next few months, many candidates will start dropping out, and we're going to move away from the, 15 people at a diner in Iowa to like Bernie Sanders on a stage with hundreds of people. So they become less and less accessible. We still have a few more months of like great accessibility. So if people are interested, we'd love to have you. And then if you're looking, we know some tricks within some states. Like I know in Iowa, the Des Moines Register is really great. We would love to know if it within your state, if you have good tips and hints on finding locations of events. We're always looking for new tools. If there's a particular candidate that you want to hit, the best thing usually to do is just follow their Facebook and set up alerts for when they add events. And then you want to get a crew. It's really important to have, a good posse with you. There's different roles to play, and we'll get into that in a minute. Everyone's going to ask the question, be ready to ask the question. It's never good to have like one person who's really ready to go and then someone else might just film, because it's hard to completely predict who will get called on in the moment. So everyone does have a question, but like I said, there are other roles to play. And then especially if you're going into, you don't have to worry about your safety per se, right, at like an Amy Klobuchar or Bernie Sanders event. But if you are trying to bird dog, a Republican or someone that's potentially has a more, it's just a more dangerous crowd, then you really want a crew for safety. I'll just like give a quick example of kind of like a fail and then a win. I'll put my friend Sean a bit on blast. He works for the Working Families Party in Iowa. He formerly was my coworker at CPD, but he grew up in Iowa and returned recently there to do work. And he really wanted to bird dog Steve King. And so he decided, he calls me and he tells me he's going to go to an NRA dinner in rural Iowa. There's no cell phone service. Sean is a person of color. And it was a really bad idea. Like he got there, he was with one other person. It was not a solid crew. It immediately was really unsafe. Just them even walking into the space, just showing up as who they were, they almost instantly got kicked out in like a very aggressive way. It was a pretty dangerous situation. Then he regrouped and got a whole bigger crew together, and wrote some more questions and went to a very public event with lots more people, somewhere with cell phone service in Iowa. And it was actually right after the Tree of Life shooting. And it was his friend that actually asked the question and got called on. But it basically compared Steve King's rhetoric to the shooters. And Steve King had like a huge meltdown on stage, and it, got picked up and went kind of viral, especially in Iowa, but a bit nationally too. And that past election was the hardest election that Steve King's ever had. He really had to campaign. And I forget, he went from like 3 points to 20-point margin. So, or reverse that, sorry. So anyway, just an example of like, it's super important to have a crew, whether it's like a friendly or less friendly, because there's lots of roles to play. And then you're going to make a plan. Everyone is going to understand each other's questions. You're going to get together early, get coffee together, and really sit down and think about each other's questions. Again, we'll talk about writing questions later, but you literally are going to write them down. You're going to rehearse them. You're going to help each other edit your questions. And you're going to make a plan. And you could think about if multiple people are getting called on, which is the goal, maybe the first question is more general, and then you'll get more focused. You can just get creative. We do recommend that everyone going in, especially if it's 3 or 4 people, is asking about the same thing. And you're, like I said, you're not going to come off together. You're not going to be wearing your matching T-shirts. You're going to show up as the individual you are that day, not the activist. And it's very often that we get called on multiple times. We'll talk about how to get called on. And so you can just think of strategy about laying your questions and how you want them to be answered. And you'll also make a plan. Some of you know, I forget the woman I think that went to Elizabeth Warren. For example, Elizabeth Warren, all of the events that I've been to her, she passes out tickets and pulls tickets for questions. So we've had to like make plans and get creative. I usually make friends with everyone around me and ask them to get a ticket and then I'm sitting there like holding my 6 tickets. We just, we know for the Dem candidates kind of what to expect. They all kind of run their events very similarly. And then we look to you also for your Congress members, if it's your city council, it's the same tactics for whatever, electeds you're going after, but part of making a plan is just kind of working together and knowing how the events usually run. And then you back each other up. And like I said, no one gets mad in the moment. No one decides to get arrested in the moment. No one goes rogue. You make a plan and you stick to the plan so that everyone stays safe. Which again, you don't have to worry about safety, if you're going to a cornfield in Iowa to the Democratic candidates. But if you're doing something that's, a bit more antagonistic, just like, please always keep safety in mind. Okay, and then you're going to show up early and you're going to scope out the location. You're going to get good seats. You're going to check the exits. This is like the stalker slide. So, just for example, when I'm pulling up to the event, we have like 6 people. We literally enter separately from each other. We all are going to sit in the first few rows, but we're not going to sit together. We're going to make sure that we have good camera angles on everyone. We're going to be communicating on our phones over, Signal and stuff, but we're not going to be talking to each other. And we're going to be looking for the way that the candidate might exit and enter. If we don't get a question, they probably will at least pause for a couple of selfies, a couple of handshakes, and you want to be that one person that can stop and get that extra time. So you just want to be strategic about that. And then it's good too, like this is also to keep in mind if you're doing something that's closer to a protest, like if you're going to stand up and disrupt, you can think about like being in a place that's harder to get to for security and things like that. And then you're going to raise your hand first, fast and high. I can't see you. I usually like to practice this and ask if there are any questions and test your hand raising abilities. It sounds really silly, but it really does work. And if you're in the first few rows and, you left your activist t-shirt at home and you're showing up as a supporter and you're smiling, you're clapping, you're making eye contact, it's actually really easy to clap. Like, you don't have to be on camera clapping for something terrible, but usually it's just very generic. We're going to fix healthcare, we're going to get jobs, we're going to fix the environment. You just clap and smile. And then you raise your hand first, you're going to get called on. I like to brag that we're really good at getting called on, and it's true. I mean, I've been to events where there's easily 200 people, and, they took 5 questions, and we got 3 out of the 5. Like, that's not uncommon for it to happen. And the trick really is just showing up and being happy, smiley, raising your hand. Okay, so now you're called on. You're going to execute your plan. If you're able to stand up, it's great to stand up. If you're able to hold the mic, hold the mic. If they don't have a mic, I love this woman, Chris, that's come with us a bunch from Wisconsin to Iowa a couple times, has said kind of like, oh, they weren't passing around a mic. People were just yelling out their questions, but the candidate had a mic. And she actually was like, oh, I have a very quiet voice. Can I borrow your microphone? And again, probably because she's a very petite, she's an older white woman. They were happy to like hand her the microphone, and then she really grabbed it and like asked some really bomb questions. So if you're able to get creative and take a mic, even better. And then the rest of your posse is going to record and also write down word for word what the candidate's response is. And then don't do the thing where you're sitting there bored and your phone's away and then your friend gets their question, you whip out your camera, because that's going to like expose you together. You can pretend to take video. Sometimes people, do ask really good questions, and I've caught other people's questions on video. There might actually be someone there asking about your issue too, so it would be cool to get that on video. And then you want to record word for word what the candidate said. It's really important to hammer that down. Sometimes the video doesn't come out, the sound's bad, and knowing what the candidate said enables the next person that asks to ask a better question. One more tip with video is like, don't do Facebook Live or Telescope or whatever the cool new live streaming things are, just in case the video, the service, cuts out or whatever. You want to make sure that you have a solid video and you can always post it later. But I can give a quick example about how it really changes questions. So Kirsten Gillibrand is now a co-sponsor of the CARE Act, which is the bill I was talking about around the opioid crisis. Anyway, so we had talked to her about this bill many, many times, and she, had gone kind of back and forth. She was interested, she wasn't sure, kind of wishy-washy over and over again. And then we found out that one of our bird doggers in New Hampshire had asked her about the CARE Act, and she said she had never heard of that. And she'd have to look it up, and no one had ever mentioned the CARE Act to her, but she was interested about like diving into the opioid crisis. And so I was kind of fuming. I'm like, we've talked to her so many times. So we knew that we were going to see her like 5 days later in Iowa. And I went with this woman, Jenny, who has come out with us a few times. She's a survivor of opioid addiction. And I helped her craft her question. And we just opened the question up with, thank you, Senator Gillibrand, for talking about the CARE Act on so many occasions, to get around her saying that she had never heard of it before. So just like a quick example of like, you know, it's really crucial to know what they said, and we can craft better questions. And actually that was the time that she said yes. And we worked with, you know, Warren's office the next day to confirm, and the next day she really did sign on as a co-sponsor. So then you want to get a handshake or an autograph or a selfie. I always thought autograph was very dated, but I did this, if we're in person and we do this, like we do a role play at the end, it'll probably be too hard of a webinar. But actually someone whipped out like a book and a pen, and it really had, like you really had to stop and like hold both things. So it kind of caught them. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to be for autographs now too, apparently. But it's just a great time to, if you got a question, follow up on the question, get some cards of the staff, especially if you got a yes, get that card so you can confirm and make sure they actually get on. If they were maybe, you know, they gave you the wishy-washy, I would like to talk more about it, get a card, plan a meeting, like actually talk to them more about it, keep following up. It's also, you know, shaking someone's hands is a way to grab their attention and hold their attention. It can be a really great tool to just get a few extra moments. And then you also want to find a journalist to repeat your message. This is, again, a reason why you have a group of people. The journalists will leave, you know, almost as soon as the candidates, because they're also going to be going to the next event to cover the next event. So you can kind of split up, and some people can kind of rush the selfie line, and some people can go to the journalist. Just be careful talking with the journalist, because if you ask a question, they'll love to talk to you, but they might ask you weird questions. You know, they might be like, what did you think of what Joe Biden said at the fair? You know, like just random things, and you just want to stay on topic. Like I always say, you can do what politicians do, like ignore whatever questions they ask and just talk about what you want to talk about. So just really be careful and stay on message. And then we also ask folks, and this is a discussion that you should have amongst yourselves at Move to Amends, but for CPD and for Bird Dog Nation, we never say like, I'm here today with the Center for Popular Democracy, or I'm here today with Bird Dog Nation. We just talk about the individual that we are that day and leave like the collective out of it. And it, you know, it was funny, the New York Times had an article a few weeks ago about the candidates going to Iowa, and they quoted, I think two, maybe it was even three of our folks in the same article, but they had no idea they were quoting three different people for Bird Dog Nation, right? Because they didn't expose themselves as members of Bird Dog Nation. So depending on the event, there might be times where you do want to step up and say, you know, the organization that you're with, but other times not. You know, again, it's just about strategy. And then you can always also reveal after the fact, you know, once you get all your yeses, kind of reveal that, you know, who are the ones that made it happen. And then you want to port back to the larger group. So within Bird Dog Nation, we have a form. If you go to our website, birddognation.org, it's like a very simple Google form. And like I said, it helps us write better questions. We also have a candidate tracker. We can track the trajectory on all these issues. We're going to start doing the same thing with congressional races around impeachment, drug pricing, various topics. And as candidates kind of narrow in on their answers, we can follow that trajectory, and we can literally see, you know, Kamala Harris said this about Medicare for all on this day, and then this, and then this. But it also actually inspires people to go out too. You know, someone might be like, I didn't really want to go to this town hall on Saturday, but then they'll see your video. Like I said, with the, you know, Gillibrand example, like, you know, that really inspired Jenny to come out, because Jenny was like, no way did she just say she never heard about that. Like, I've talked to her about this before. Like, I am getting my ass to Iowa and I'm asking her about this, right? So like it inspires other people to come out and keeps people going out. But now we can talk a little bit about what makes a good question. I would love, you know, if people can try to comment or maybe unmute. Even, I know it's not, it's a bit difficult, but I like, to the extent that it can, to kind of be interactive. But I can also just keep talking, but someone like, you know, chime in if anyone writes in the comment box. But I'll just use the example of healthcare. But obviously you're going to do it around your issues. But if, for example, if I said, Senator, how will you fix healthcare? Is that a good question or a bad question? I can, answer, obviously that's a bad question. We always try to avoid things are, what are you going to do about? What's your plan? How will you fix? Because the candidates have stock responses to all of those. As soon as they hear that, they're like, yes, robot mode. And they just like regurgitate the, thing that they've practiced a million times. So we're going to ask something more pointed. So if I said, Senator, will you sign on as a co-sponsor to Medicare for All? That's a better question, but it doesn't win the room. And especially with things like this, and it's the same thing with your issues too, like people are confused exactly what the ask is. And sometimes, universal health care, there's Medicare for America. I don't even remember what Kamala's new plan's called. It's very tricky. All the names are the same. No one's really paying attention per se to your question. So what will really make it stronger is if you can add in both your personal story and kind of a quick summary of what you're actually asking, but at the same time kind of avoiding political, jargon and speak that might lose the crowd, if that makes sense. We say that, questions should be 60 seconds or less, and actually 60 seconds is a really long time. You'll probably do half of that. I was working with someone on their question recently, and they're like, my questions are so long, I have no idea how to cut it down. Like, it'll never be short enough. And I was like, well, just read it out once the way that you would say it so we know, like, what your starting point is. And she was like, no, I'm too embarrassed. It's too long. And she read the question, and it was 30 seconds. So, like, just keep in mind that 60 seconds is a really long time, and you can probably fit everything you need to fit in. You're going to start with something personal, so maybe a couple sentences about your story, something that generalizes it and gives it scope, which can also be the part where you kind of explain the bill or, the ask of your question. And then you're going to end with something that puts it on the spot. And then if you're really good, you can, have your final sentence kind of bring it back to the original personal story. Like in the case of the video we watched with Allie, I really liked how she laid out her story about her son's medication, which is something, drug pricing is something that's going to resonate with everyone in the room. So then she talked about the scope and what the bill would do and how it would break patents when drug companies are unwilling to negotiate. But then she didn't just end with, will you sign on to this bill? She said, because it would make me and my son feel safer in this country, which is like a very powerful way to bring it back to her personal story. I like to look at this picture too of Marco Rubio. Some of you may recognize this is one of the Parkland shooting survivors, and he's asking a question about gun control. And I just like to show up because Marco Rubio, it's like the moment that it hit Marco Rubio that like the survivor just won the room in like a huge way. And he had to make a decision, whether to say yes and keep the room on his side, but then, anger all of his supporters and the NRA or so on, or say no and just come off as like a terrible jerk. And, he chose the second option. And that one really went viral. And it just, going back to winning the room and getting the room on your side and how that really puts the candidate on the spot. So, the way to do it is to tell your personal story and connect it to the legislation. We also, we like to say that the answer is in the question. So you're going to present a problem, but you're also presenting a solution. You're not asking them to actually solve anything for you. You're giving them the solution. You're asking them to sign on. And that's what really puts them on the spot because, again, they're so good at crafting these responses. I mean, I watch a lot. Sometimes I'm just, like, amazed, like, how did we even get here? I feel like I'm picking on Kamala a lot, but only because I've seen her recently. So these are, like, the recent things in my mind. But I saw a woman recently ask a question. She told her story of her abortion. It was super emotional. And she talked about all the abortion bans popping up and how are we going to ensure that women in future generations were going to have the same right. And Kamala in her answer was obviously, pro-choice, but somehow in her answer starts talking about minimum wage and equal pay. So it was like, wow, like how did we get here? These people are experts at this. They literally train all the time on this. So, you know, we're spending like an hour right now, but they've spent hours and hours and hours. So, you know, this is why we do this and this is why we practice. I always recommend too, like people literally write down their questions and bring your question with you when you go. And it's okay to read off your question. I think it can actually come off good, like it just shows that you're passionate. It's okay to sound nervous. Again, it can just read to the room as passion. Unfortunately, even though we are angry, anger doesn't really resonate well with the crowd. It's really easy for people to dismiss you, especially if you are, you know, a person of color, a woman. They're just going to say angry woman, you know, and kind of dismiss you. So again, just thinking to strategy, you know, I'm not for respectability and so on, but I am for winning. So if that's what we have to do in that moment to win while we're creating a world where we don't have to, you know, play all these games, then we'll do what we do to get the yes. And then there'll be other times where we can release our anger and do a protest and we'll all chain ourselves to the office until they say yes or whatever it may be. But in that moment of bird dogging, we're going to, you know, just be strategic about how the crowd reads us, if that makes sense.
Julia,
but I'd like to kind of,
sorry, I think I have one question here that came up. I think it was Mark Harding. I'm going to try to allow you to talk. Mark?
No, that was a mistake. I accidentally hit the raise my hand button. Forgive me.
That's okay.
We can continue.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
I did just kind of want to open it up if people had any thoughts or questions. If people had any ideas about their question or their personal story, I know it's hard in this format, so we can also, you know, talk about it other ways. But yeah, I'll just pause if anyone has thoughts or questions or ideas about what their question might look like.
All right. If you've got questions, you can go ahead and type them in the chat bar or raise your hand and I'll click on you and unmute you. Seems like I can unmute one person at a time is the thing.
I can also just kind of keep talking a bit more about Bird Dog Nation and some upcoming stuff like Where We're Waiting, but please jump in at any time. So like I said, we're going to continue going to the early primary states. So if you all want to come out with us, we'd love to have you. Next month in Iowa, there's a big event. Well, there's actually something happening next week in Iowa. We're still looking for some people if anyone's in the Midwest. All the candidates will be speaking at a large dinner, and then that's a good time. You know, the candidate events usually pop up only a couple of days before, which is unfortunate. But if there's ever a big event, they're very rarely just flying to Iowa for one dinner. So if there's, or whatever, you know, the location is. So if there's something big going on, you know that there'll be side events. And then it being recess right now, there's just a lot of events going on in all 4 primary states. So also, if you live near South Carolina, New Hampshire, Nevada, and you're interested in just getting connected generally with other bird doggers there, we'd love to connect you. And then, like I said, we're going to start hitting up all the congressional races, which is really exciting. And we bird dog on various issues around democracy. So I think there is overlap between, you know, the things that we're working on. So we'd just love to collaborate with you all and head up the campaign trail with you. So just let us know. And like I said, if I could just, you know, I think somehow I'm sure I can get all of your emails and I'll send you an email and just keep you all in the loop. We have weekly calls with Bird Dog Nation and we do different topics every week. I believe on Tuesday, next Tuesday, the calls are every Tuesday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. And next Tuesday, I think we're going to do impeachment and we'll have someone on from Move to Impeach, which is exciting. So if you're interested in that, I'll make sure you have the dial-in and everything so you can join in.
Awesome. Okay, so a couple things. I can definitely get you the emails and stuff from everybody here. If for some reason you want to opt out of that and you're on this webinar, let me know. But otherwise, I'll assume that you're in. And also, so you may have noticed we've started sending emails whenever we notice there's an event happening. That would be good to get you all to. We've been sending an email to like a radius around there. So keep an eye out for those. And I empower you to go try it. And then I just moved to Nevada, so we should connect because I would love to connect with folks here. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much. Are there any questions or anything? Y'all have been pretty quiet. I'm going to take that as like you're soaking it in and loving it. But if you do have any chat bars right here, but I don't see any. Oh, wait, there's a Q&A here. Okay, here's one. I know that going viral is unpredictable, but what role does having a press campaign, like press releases, connecting with press at the event, building the story, etc., attach to your bird dogging efforts to help push the conversation in local media?
That's a really good question. So what we do at CPD, and like I said, you know, you just have to think of the strategy in your own organization. We actually very rarely release stuff at CPD or as Bird Dog Nation. It doesn't really oftentimes fit in our strategy. But I can give a couple, like I know recently I went to Iowa with a group of teenagers from New York City to Bird Dog de Blasio. We followed him around all day. And for that I actually don't know if we said CPD, but we used their organizations. They were part of Make the Road and this broader urban collaborative. And we did get press on that. And, you know, we did send out the videos were on New York One and New York Post and New York Times, you know, that got picked up quite a bit. So it really does depend, and that definitely helps. Something that I didn't say that's just reminding me of that story too, bringing, you know, young folks to Iowa, people of color to Iowa. Iowa's very white. A lot of the events, you know, are kind of an older crowd. So we knew that we were going to stick out. We got the first question because I like to brag. We're really good at getting the first question. It was very funny. De Blasio was like, you know, it was a young man. He said he traveled from Queens, New York to go and, you know, talk to him. And De Blasio paused and was like, everyone applaud for this young man. He came all the way from New York. I was like biting my nails like, oh, he's not going to like what comes next because they were hitting him pretty hard. But anyway, so De Blasio, you know, the next person he called on was like a, you know, friendly looking older white woman because that's how our society works, right? But what he didn't know is that woman was also with us and she was like our ringer. So she said, you know, she's like, I came here today to ask you a question about education, but I met a high school student when I got here sitting right next to me. So I'd like to give my question to them, which works perfectly because the candidate can't say no, they'd look awful. So that didn't exactly answer your question, but I just wanted to tell that story, just thinking again about accessibility and bird dogging and getting creative when you think about your posse and how you might, you know, show up and who might be more likely to be called on. But to your question about press, I think it's really tricky. Another thing that we do is we have organizations who we work with on bird dogging on certain topics, or just like known activists, for example, on Twitter, folks in the recovery community, and we'll give them our video and they'll push it out, and they'll just push it out as Women in Iowa asked Joe Biden about the Supreme Court or whatever it is. And they don't, you know, so it gets picked up on Twitter and it gets put around, but we're not exposing ourselves as like 10 friends asking about this, and it works into the narrative as that, which is actually true, you know, that there's just people all over the country who are fighting on this and asking questions on these topics, if that makes sense.
Totally, yes, thank you. All right, any other questions? Well, I'm sure there will be some that come up. This is a lot of information, and I'm sure new to a lot of people on this webinar. So maybe we can make sure that we can email you whatever comes up, if that's all right.
Yeah, please. We'll make sure that, you know, and if you want to email me directly, I can just say my email is jpeter, no S, JPETER @populaردemocracy.org. I'd love to hear from you. We have a Facebook page too, the Bird Dog Nation. You can send us messages. Even if you're doing, you know, bird dogging on campaigns that we don't have, we love to hear about it. We love to help with questions. We love to connect you. You know, we have members all across the country, so we can help find people that would be interested. So hit us up.
Awesome. And Tuesday nights are the calls, right?
Yeah, Tuesday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. We're going to have this recording up on the website, and we'll send it out, and I'll send it to you as well in case you want it. And thank you so much, Julia. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you all. Thanks so much.
All right. Have a great night, everybody.
Yeah. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.